we're going to be talking about two important aspects when we talk about error correction. One, correction of language that has not been learned. And two, language that has been learned incorrectly. In fact, the focus that we're going to have most of this time is language that has not been learned correctly. It wasn't learned correctly. So let's look at the reasons. Let's start to see some of the reasons behind errors and mistakes. The question could be, why did the student have a mistake or error in the first place? To better understand how to help the student, we need to understand the reasoning behind the student's mistake. So we're going to look at 4 general reasons for student mistakes. They're here at the bottom. We're going to be looking at transference, fossilization, interlanguage, and slips. So let's start with transference. Transference, according to Jarvis, is the influence that my L1 has over L2. In this case, me, a Spanish speaker, how does Spanish affect English? Your students, how does your students' Spanish affect their English learning? We are going to divide this, we can divide this into 3 categories. We're going to be studying how it influences vocabulary, grammar structure, and oral and written syntax. Transference has an effect on vocabulary. For example, actually, I am working from home because of the quarantine. This is an example of transference in vocabulary. The student here tried to say actualmente, talking about time, but obviously in English, this is different. So this is an example of transference at a vocabulary level. An example in grammar, I am agree with you. This is transference of grammar because the student is using Spanish grammar to say this in English. In English, we do not use am. We do not use the verb to be to use agreement. Or syntax. I like tacos because are delicious. There's a problem in syntax. In Spanish, Spanish is a beautiful language and you don't need to have the subject because the declination of the verb tells me the subject and the tense. In English, we need to have the subject. So the correct way should be, I like tacos because they are delicious. So here we can see that these are 3 examples of how vocabulary, grammatical structure, and oral and written syntax are affected by transference. So the first aspect we're seeing is transference. The next aspect that is a reason why students can have mistakes or errors is fossilization. Fossilization has to do with information you learned in the past, but you don't use it correctly in the present. So maybe I studied something, but then when it comes time to use it later, it is replaced by something different that is said by a group notion, an individual notion, or L1. This means that I am not aware that I forgot. The student does not understand that the student forgot the information. The student replaces the information with something different. An example of fossilization of a group idea or group notion could be, can you tell me where is the bathroom? This is incorrect. This is, we should be using indirect questions, but this is something that is very common. This is very common for students to say these kinds of incorrect embedded questions. And it's so common that I can think of it as a group notion. It's a group problem because many people are having this problem. An individual notion or individual idea could be, he studied in the UNAM in Mexico City. The student thinks this is correct because this is fossilization. And the student thinks that he studied is the correct format, the correct grammar to use, when it should say he studies in the UNAM in Mexico City. So this is an example of an individual notion, and fossilization of L1 transfer could be, children are not studying these days. Children's with S is incorrect, but in Spanish, I say plural with S, so I think this is correct. This is another example of fossilization. So fossilization is when the student does not remember how to use the information correctly. They are not aware, they don't know that they are not using it correctly. They replace it with something different. And this has a negative effect because they're using something incorrectly. Now, the most difficult part to, the most difficult errors or mistakes to correct have to do with interlanguage or erroneous interlanguage. Every student, all of the students have an interlanguage. Interlanguage is when you use, it's not fully L1 or L2. Interlanguage is the language that is in between, and there's usually a lot of errors or mistakes, and it is normal. It is normal for students to have interlanguage. It's part of the learning process. The problem here is that if teachers do not correct mistakes or errors that are appearing in the interlanguage, this interlanguage kind of consolidates, and the student has this mistake or error for all of their time. They think they are correct. Interlanguage is the language that students have in between learning, and if they are not corrected, they will believe that they are correct. Let's look at examples or the reasons behind interlanguage. These are the reasons why interlanguage happens mostly. One of the aspects could be simplification. An example of this is that if a student uses simple past, and does not use the present perfect, the student simplifies his language use or her language use and does not explore the present perfect. Therefore, having an incorrect language use in the future because the student does not use it. So it is not a full L2. Another aspect is overgeneralization. Overgeneralization has to do when students use one topic or one idea a lot, and they use it for everything. The examples here in the past, go'd or come'd, they are overgeneralizing the rule to use the simple past. Or faulty teaching. That's a very big problem too. The teacher says, "Can you tell me what is the time?" They're using an incorrect utterance, but the student thinks it's correct because the teacher is using it. Now, this is a very important example. Can you tell me what is the time? I will talk about this a little bit more later on because this is a problem that is very common with English teachers. Many English teachers have this mistake that I have personally heard when observing classes. Another reason that the interlanguage starts to consolidate negatively is avoidance. That students do not use certain aspects of language they don't feel comfortable with. If the student does not understand the language very well and prefers not to use it, they avoid it and they create a gap in their language learning. And this language learning negatively affects them. So avoidance is another aspect that is negative and consolidates a bad interlanguage. And false concepts that are hypothesized. The student thinks this is correct. An example, he is talked to the teacher. Many students, I personally hear, he is talked to the teacher. They're trying to use the verb to be, but they're using it incorrectly. So this is an example where it is negatively affecting the student. All right, so this is a false concept that is hypothesized. So remember, when talking about interlanguage is normal. But the problem is that if you do not correct interlanguage as a teacher, the student thinks his or her interlanguage is the correct way to speak. That's why you can hear students in advanced levels speaking incorrectly, making very basic mistakes. And they're making those mistakes or errors because they were not corrected before. We also have to take into consideration that there are inevitable slips. A slip is when the student says something, but it's very basic, and usually the student says, oh, wait, no, let me correct myself. And then inevitable slip is when the student is able to go back and say, wait, this was incorrect, and change it so it's a little bit different. When talking about this, we need to understand something important. Here we have hypercorrection. Oh, sorry. Here we have hypercorrection. A hypercorrection, and it's at the top of the triangle because this is something you should not do. If a student has a slip, and there's a small problem with this part, the teacher should not correct every single problem. The teacher should understand when to make the corrections. A good moment to make corrections is when you hear or you see or you read a global error. A global error is a communicative error which prevents comprehension. If a student has a global error where it is what he or she said you cannot understand at all, this is an example of a global error and you should correct it in that moment. Okay. So these are the reasons why students are making these mistakes or errors. Transference, fossilization, interlanguage, and slips that are okay, they are normal. And remember, interlanguage is part of the process. What you should do as a teacher is make sure the interlanguage is helping them to improve. If you do not correct basic mistakes or mistakes they're doing a lot, they will think this is correct, and that's part of their consolidated interlanguage. Now, let's look at the basis or the foundation of all of this information we're studying. The theoretical basis. Correcting errors or mistakes has to be done considering several factors in order to have practical outcomes that are able to benefit students. One of the things you have to understand is that all of these corrections that we're talking about today, they are to help the student learn more. They are to help the student learn more by correcting. So first, let's see which mistakes, which errors should I be focusing on? We should be focusing on global errors. A local error is, for example, he eat tacos. Now, if the student repeats he eats, and does not add the third person singular s, correct it. But if the student just makes this small mistake, it's a local error and it is not 100% necessary to correct. A global error, taco is he what? The teacher can say, what did you say? I don't understand. And this is an example of a global error. Remember, Global error is when the student makes a mistake that is so big that you have to stop and correct because there is no comprehension. Also, high frequency errors, like I mentioned before. Third person singular or subject omission are high frequency errors. These are examples that are very frequent in many, many language classes. However, you as a teacher, maybe you can hear one error, one mistake that is repeated in your class. In that class, correct, or by one student. This one student is making this error, this mistake many, many, many times. This is a moment where you are able to, where you should be able to correct. Now let's talk about when to correct. If you can hear an error or mistake in a class, but it is not relevant to the pedagogical focus, probably not correct. You should only correct errors that are relevant to pedagogical focuses when you're teaching a specific topic. I am teaching the present perfect. She have lived in Oaxaca for 2006. Because right now in this example, my focus is the present perfect, I will correct she has lived. The for, it should say since. I do not correct for because it is not relevant to the focus I have at the moment. If I correct for in this example, the student could be confused and think that we're talking about prepositions, in this case of time, for example. So this is why it's important to focus on when you're going to be making corrections that are relevant to the language, the pedagogical focus, and or if they are very repetitive. As I mentioned before, hypercorrections are not recommended. A hypercorrection is when you are correcting every single mistake that the student is making or a lot of the mistakes. If you are hypercorrecting, you actually induce more errors or mistakes. Students are so self-conscious about what they should be doing or not doing that they start making more errors. So it would be important to be careful with how you're correcting. You can also inhibit your students. They don't feel comfortable asking questions because they feel like they're going to, or they don't feel comfortable exploring their language because they're going to be corrected constantly. And they're afraid, they're scared of making those mistakes. And this also produces less student experimentation. This means that the student does not feel very comfortable expressing, exploring, experimenting with their language use. And remember, an important part of language learning for students is that they are able to experiment. They should be able to try and see how they are working their language. Okay, so I'm going to have a small moment here to mention something important. I've been talking about error correction, but I haven't been mentioning something that is really important. How you should be making these corrections. When you correct, there's basically two ways. One, you can explain, take your time, and have the student understand it. Or two, you give them the answer. So now let's look at something important that has to do with memory. When we talk about short-term memory, it's something that lasts for a few seconds to tens of minutes, and it is only sustained through repetition. So if your error correction in the past has been, the student says, he eats tacos, and you say, no, eats. Okay, continue. And that's all your correction. This is short-term memory. The student is not applying new knowledge. He or she is only repeating. When we talk about long-term memory, Long-term memory is something that can last for a few hours to days, weeks, or even a lifetime. And it is sustained through rehearsing or through your teaching, through your error correction. So this is an important differentiation. When we talk about error correction, if you are only giving the answer, students are not able to really analyze the information. You have to explain it in a way that they are able to internalize the information and make it part of their new interlanguage. So the root of the problem, we need to understand the root of each problem for students. And it is important to understand the root of the error in order to teach or help students restructure what they know. If you are not, if a student has an error and you give them the answer, you are correcting it, spoon feeding the answer, but the student is not able to restructure his or her information. So in this way, we're going to be focusing on teaching, restructuring the student's information from their mistake or error. Let's go back and look at the three important things we have seen so far: transference, fossilization, and interlanguage. So if a student has a mistake, error, or transference, what you should do as a teacher is create a contrast between L1 and L2. This way the student can see the error. The student says, I am agreed. As a teacher, you should stop and say, wait a minute, you are thinking in Spanish. In Spanish, yes, you say that, but in English, remember, the verb to be is not necessary, or in the terms that you are able to speak to your student based on his or her level. But you should tell the student, there is a contrast. This is Spanish grammar, this is English grammar, and you are mixing. The student says, I have 12 years old. Have is what the student is translating the verb to English and saying it like that. This is a transfer error where you as a teacher have to contrast. Stop, make a contrast between L1 and L2. When you hear a fossilization error, you have to create a comparison, or you should create a comparison between something that is correct that can help you get to the new information. The student maybe says, we goed to the park yesterday. We goed to the park yesterday. The student is not remembering how to use the verb go in the past. It's irregular. So maybe you can compare other verbs that are regular and irregular, and so the student can come to the conclusion, oh wait, go is irregular. And this comparison from something correct that they are using to something that they're not using so well is the way that they are able to internalize and have this part of their long-term memory. Or he studied in the morning. Okay, remember third person singular, and you can use all of these, you can use these comparisons so students are able to really internalize the information. Remember, the goal is always to have the students restructure language. The most difficult part to help, guide, or correct has to do with interlanguage. When we talk about interlanguage, remember, it's what they're forming, the language that they are forming little by little. And this is normal, this is part of their language learning process. But the problem could be that the student is not being corrected, and you have to help them break this part of interlanguage so they are able to use it correctly. You can do this by contrasting and comparing language through guided questions to help students understand and internalize the information. The example that we talked about before, can you tell me what is the time? This is a good example of interlanguage because many students of my personal experience think this is correct. When they think this is correct, you have to go into their interlanguage, contrast, compare, guide them. Okay, look, can you tell me is a question, right? Subject, verb, inversion, etc. And you start to explain, talking to them, guiding them, having them come to conclusions themselves. If you tell the student, it's incorrect, you should say, can you tell me what the time is? Okay, thank you, teacher. And that's all the feedback the student gets. It's not helping the student restructure their language use. So you have to understand the root of the problem, how to attack it, so you are able to help the students restructure, and you really teach them from the mistake or the error. Remember, if you are only correcting by giving the student the answer, you are not helping the student restructure and learn. And that information is that information becomes part of their interlanguage. Now, something that is true is that many of us have a lot of students. And if I, as a teacher, correct every single mistake or error in class, I won't teach. I will be correcting the whole class because correction is time consuming. But it should be necessary for you as a teacher to think of how to structure your time to be focusing on mistakes, errors that are common, that are very repetitive, or that you can hear that it's very founded in their interlanguage, and you need to help them to structure that in a different way. So now let's look at some ways to apply this. Let's look at the application. Let's look at the examples, but first, let's consider that in order to have a positive error correction feedback moment with your students, you firstly have to have created positive rapport. The rapport has to do with how the students feel with you correcting them. One thing you could do is ask students how they would like to be corrected. How would you like it to be done? How can it be done so you feel good, that I feel good? You have to find the structure, the way that it's done positively. Like as mentioned in the next topic, it should be in a positive tone and context. This helps the student really focus on what and how to, really focus on the information that they're receiving as feedback, not to think of it as scolding or they're doing something very bad. Oh, sorry, teacher, I won't do that again. They should feel comfortable in the context with your tone of voice, with how you're giving them the feedback and the restructuring correction, so that they are able to use that information to help them. Like I mentioned a moment ago, you also have to use hierarchy. You have to focus on which errors you are going to be correcting. You should address necessary errors. Like I mentioned before, if there is a global error, of course, you should correct it in that moment. If there's an error that is very repetitive, okay, maybe I can talk about this at the end of this topic. I will have a small moment. I will talk about this, or you have to choose the appropriate moment. The student is speaking. Okay, I heard 3 mistakes. I am only going to explain one, but after the student is finished speaking, so that I don't interrupt him or her. So these are examples that you have to really take into consideration. Now, we're going to look at several examples, specifically with basic errors, which should be more common, and complex errors, which have to do with interlanguage. So let's look at some common errors. One way that you can address common errors, that you are not giving the answer. You are not giving the answer. Remember, all of these are error corrections where you as a teacher help restructure. Could be sentence starters. The student says, "My from is Mexico." And you as a teacher can start saying, okay, wait. Remember, and the student usually is able to pick up, remember what they have studied before and say, am from Mexico. Okay. And they are producing the language with a small guiding from you, but it's mostly the student who is able to restructure his or her language use. This is an example. It's a little secret. For example, the student says, picture of a stomach. Picture of a stomach. In pronunciation, you can tell the student, oh, let me tell you a little secret. In English, we do not pronounce the last E, picture. Or in English, this CH is pronounced like a K, stomach, not stomach, stomach. This is just one phrase. Little secret is one phrase, but you can use the phrase that you are most comfortable with, and this sounds positive to the student. It doesn't sound like the student is making a mistake. It sounds like the student is getting more secret or positive information. Again, this is more for younger students. For younger students as well, you can use numbers or your fingers. The student says, I have pencil. Hold on. Here. I have pencil. Wait a minute, you're missing something. With this symbol, with this gesture, you're telling the student, I have pencil, you're missing something here. You are not giving the answer. The student has to think for a moment. This is another example of how you can use a correction that helps students restructure. Colors, I think, is something that all teachers really use very well. Colors. In the first sentence, if she went to school, the teacher writes, if she went to school, black is the subject, blue is the verb in past. The student writes or says, if they walk to school. As a teacher, I use the color blue to emphasize so the student can look at the previous color and say, oh, I should use the past. So colors are a way to not give the answer, to have the student focus and restructure the answer. And TPR, total physical response, in the sense that I'm using it to elicit the answer. The student says, if she went to school, okay, that's good. The next student says, if they walk to school. The teacher can use this gesture. No, if they, the past, if they, and this helps the student focus and understand that this is the past tense. Okay, very good. So these are examples that can be helpful for basic errors or including younger students. Now we're going to see some of the more complex ways to help students, especially when they have interlanguage errors, mistakes that are very, very consolidated. So let's see some interlanguage errors. This is a small conversation, okay? Student 1 says, Paco, don't eat tacos. The teacher says, student 1, tell me one thing you eat and one thing your brother eats. The student says, I eat pizza, my brother eats pizza. And this is an example where I can use the student, hold on. This is an example where I can use the student's use, the student's correct use of the S, eats, to help the student navigate. This we can call, this is something that we can call Socratic questioning, where you are using questions to guide the student. And the student is should be able to contradict himself or herself. When the student contradicts himself or herself in what they said before, you did it. You had the student learn something and restructure, because the student said, wait, no, what I did was incorrect. But it's difficult because you need to use their information. Another example is something that I'm calling empowering teaching. An example of this could be, one of the students says, student 2, Lisa, don't go to school. The teacher can say, wait a minute, are you sure? Student 1, come here and help student 2. Don't give her the answer, explain. So when the student is teaching another student, you're helping both students. The student that teaches the topic that you explained previously learns it better and understands it better and breaks their interlanguage. And the new student receives the information from a classmate. And usually that is a closer bond to the student, and it helps the student understand it and receive it much better. We also have mnemonic devices. Now, a mnemonic device is any kind of symbol, memory, words, letters that you use to produce stimulus in the student so that they understand and memorize something better. This is a personal example of mine of a mnemonic device. A long time ago, I had an intermediate group of students that had the problem of not using the third person singular. So what I proposed is that we would use this formula. I put this drawing, this symbol on the board. He, she, it, S, you add S, and La Bikina, the song La Bikina with the marimbas and everything. So if the student made a mistake or committed an error where the student said he eat tacos, I would have my stereo ready. I would play La Bikina. It would cause the students to laugh, but it allowed them to understand musically, in this case, music was the mnemonic device, that every time they made this mistake, they would hear La Bikina. It worked very quickly for students. They understood their problems, and it helped me even more because students started to listen to their classmates. If one of their classmates said something incorrectly with third person singular, teacher, La Bikina for Jose, because students were self-aware of this. Those are some general examples. There are many more ways, and it doesn't matter which approach or which way you use. The important thing is that you do not give the student the answer, that you explain and the student is able to understand it and restructure. So in conclusion, we have the ability to generate profound learning from students' mistakes or errors. Every time they make a mistake or error, we have the possibility to help them understand better their language use. We should try to provoke self-awareness of their language use to foster self-regulation. Self-regulation, as a conclusion, is the idea that the student is able to understand when that this is a problem that I have, a mistake, correct it, and if it happens again, it is not a mistake or error, it's a slip. A slip is something that and I correct myself. So as teachers, it is important for us to be working on how to help students improve their language, learn more, but you as a teacher, when they when they have a mistake, use that to help them learn. So this is the bibliography. I believe I will be able to share this presentation with everyone. And that is the information from my part. Thank you very much. Remember, if anything you can remember from this webinar is, do not give the student the answer directly. Have the student work it out with your help, guide them, so that they are the ones who arrive to the correct answer. Not so much you tell them the answer, they have to decipher the answer. Obviously, this takes a lot of work from your part as a teacher to see how you are able to help the student using a lot of strategies so the student is able to restructure his or her interlanguage. Okay, thank you very much. That's it for my part.
Muchísimas gracias, maestro. Le agradecemos. Estamos seguros que, pues, obviamente, este tipo de intervención que usted hizo da para más tiempo. Sin embargo, pues también vamos a dar ahorita paso y le recordamos a todos nuestros participantes, les voy a hacer mención de qué opciones tienen ustedes para que puedan participar y hacer algunas preguntas aprovechando a nuestro conferencista. Si bien ustedes van a ver que tienen la opción de levantar la mano, preguntas y respuestas. Les pedimos de favor que si alguien quiere hacer una pregunta de viva voz, por favor haga favor de levantar mano y se le dará inmediatamente un mensaje para que ustedes puedan iniciar y activar su micrófono y hacer la pregunta. Si tuvieran algún problema, les pedimos también en el área de chat de preguntas, en el área de preguntas, más bien, ahí ustedes pueden escribir su pregunta y las leeremos para que nuestro conferencista, el maestro Roberto García, pueda hacer las preguntas. Tendremos aproximadamente de 10 a 15 minutos para esta opción de preguntas.
Okay, there's a question here from, I'm sorry if I don't pronounce it correctly, Jergerik. He says, he says, so you think it's better idea to correct students when speaking or writing? This presentation was focused more on correcting students in the classroom, live in the moment. Writing is more of a different kind of activity where the student is producing, usually individually, sometimes not in the same classroom. So the error correction should be done in all of the moments. But in this case, we were talking more about the corrections that the teachers can have during a live class. However, when writing, there is more ability to have even more. You can hypercorrect, per se. You can correct more in writing because students will have more time to look at it, understand it in a more in a different way.
Okay, muchas gracias, maestro. ¿Alguna otra pregunta? Invitamos a nuestro público que se anime, aprovechando que está el maestro Roberto. Yo creo que nos pudiera compartir también más de su experiencia. Tenemos otra pregunta, maestro, por ahí.
Yes.
Carolina Muñoz.
Carolina Muñoz says, what is my opinion about correcting students using the finger strategy? When you say the finger strategies, I imagine it's the strategies that I explained during the course, this webinar. This is something personally at the moment. Sometimes I teach students that are younger, they're younger students, and the finger strategy, the one that I explained, is very useful because students are usually forget to use articles, or they forget to have specific words that they're forgetting. So we can use the finger strategy, or I use it personally to help them. Okay, I am Mexico. You forgot this word, and then the student focuses their attention on this space, and this is something that can help them. Okay.
Gracias, maestro. También tenemos la pregunta de Itandewi Reyes.
Okay, for Itandewi Reyes says, which is the best way to correct students in reading, in their pronunciation? When reading, something that is, if we think about not hypercorrecting, means that you have to check and see which are the best, what's the best moment to correct the student. So if the student has many pronunciation mistakes, personally, if it's a very big mistake, a global error, a mistake that I don't understand the pronunciation at all, I don't understand what it was, I recommend stopping at that moment and saying, wait, this is a mistake that has to be addressed at this moment. If it's not a very big problem, you can listen and you can wait, and at the end of their reading say, hey, you know what? I'm going to focus on 2 words. These 2 words you pronounce like this, which should be like this, repeat. Everybody in the class repeat, and this helps students to understand it better. You involve more students. So that would be my answer. If it's a global error, if it's a pronunciation that is not understandable at all, correct in that moment. If you understand everything, but you hear mistakes, choose the ones that are the most important. Okay. Un moment, please.
Tenemos otra pregunta, me parece por ahí, es de María Sack.
For Maria Sag asks, by local error, do you mean an individual error? No, a local error, there's 2 types of errors when we talk about error correction with specific terms. Local error is an error or mistake where the student has a small problem and the small problem does not affect the understanding. Global error has to do with if the student has a mistake that is very big and I as the teacher do not understand it at all. If you give me a moment. Hold on. Very quickly, it explains it here. Local error is, for example, he eat tacos because it's a small problem, small mistake, but I still understand what the speaker says. Global error, taco is he what? And this is the problem where I say, I'm sorry, I don't understand what you mean. That is the difference between a local error and a global error. Okay.
Antes, maestro, por ahí creo que también pregunta Itzel Mendoza Cruz, antes, un poco anterior a Juana Soledad, ¿le podemos dar respuesta, maestro?
Sí. Itzel says, do you think that drills could work for correcting mistakes and errors? Okay, a drill is when a student, for example, let's say, I say, the student says, he eats tacos. I'm sorry, I love tacos, that's why I'm using that example a lot. So if the student says he eats tacos, and I tell the student, no, it's with S. Repeat, eat, 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 eat. A repetition is used to have a short-term effect. Yes, it could work. It could work. But if we talk about neurological aspects, it is going into short-term memory. It is not going into long-term memory. So in that sense, drills could work, but they are not as effective as having the students focus, restructure, break their language use, and use it in the appropriate way. So the answer could be yes, but not as well as using different strategies where you have the students think about how to use their language better.
Gracias, maestro. Ahora sí podemos darle respuesta a Juana Soledad Medrano González.
Okay, Juana is asking, she's talking about her context where she has presentations and she gives students, they're presenting, she takes notes, and she gives feedback at the end. This is, and she's asking if it would be better to do, if that's correct, or to wait, or to do it at that moment. The answer is, I mentioned it before, I don't remember to whom, but the idea is, if it's a global error, an error where you do not understand, there's a breakdown in communication and you don't understand, correct in that moment, because there is no communication happening. But if you can understand, it's perfect to wait until they finish. The only recommendation could be that be sure to limit the amount of corrections and feedback that you're giving so that students don't feel overwhelmed. Because if you correct and you tell them, oh, you did this, it doesn't, it can seem a little bit negative. Juana, you use the word feedback, which is very good. Feedback has to do with giving information, giving corrections information to students, and feedback has to do with creating a positive environment. This means when you give the feedback, you should focus on one or two positive things and then explain some areas where they could improve. So when you talk about feedback, yes, it's good because you should be able to tell them you did this well. You can improve on this, and this is the error correction.
Muchas gracias, maestro. Creo que por aquí también tenemos una pregunta de Yerick Mold. Creo que por ahí esa pregunta tampoco no le habíamos dado respuesta. No sé si la logra ver.
Esta fue la primera que respondí, pero no presioné el botón, como no sabía usar esa parte todavía.
Ok, maestro.
Para que se quitara.
Esta otra pregunta de Raquel, creo que sí, acaba de llegar.
Okay, Raquel asks, what do you recommend to improve the skills and limit the errors? I'm not so sure how to answer this, because to improve skills, there are many activities that you can do to improve skills. Basically, all of the language you are exposing the students helps them improve skills. The problem that I have maybe a little bit is when you say limit their errors, that is something that could be counterproductive. If the student does not feel like he or she can have a mistake or make an error during the class, it doesn't allow them to explore and try to use their language differently. So if you try to limit their errors, the student will be self-conscious, they will speak less, and they will not really try to explore their language use. So I would say that improve skills, probably what you're doing today, what you're doing now, you can look for more strategies constantly. But for the skills or errors, to limit the skills, the mistake errors, I would say that should not be your goal. The goal of the teacher should not be to limit their mistakes or errors. It should be better to help students understand from those so they can have more learning. Students are always going to have mistakes and errors. We, Spanish speakers, have mistakes all the time. So language is not something that you are going to be able to perfect. In fact, you are only going to be able to expand it, learn more vocabulary, learn something, a new context, a new idiom. So better than try to limit, try to see how you can use this information to help you, to help students learn from that mistake. And ultimately, you can try to help students become more autonomous, where they can correct their own mistakes a little bit better. So that would be more so my answer. Okay.
Estefanía Díaz también hace una pregunta, me parece, por ahí también, hace una participación.
Okay, Estefania is asking more a little bit more about pronunciations. She's giving a specific example like hamburger. If the student pronounces jamburger, or for me personally, when students say school, it should say school, not school. These kinds of pronunciation problems are because of transference. This is caused by transference. So when we talk about transference, we can help them restructure some parts, but some parts we won't be able to really help restructure because this is very embedded in their language use. You can hear speakers from if you hear somebody speaking Spanish and you say, oh, now that person's from France. Listen to how he speaks, she speaks. You can hear a person say, this person is from the United States, etc. The pronunciation and our accent will not really be eliminated per se. So the recommendation in this case is repetition, repetition, repetition. But with specific pronunciation, there's a possibility that it will not be corrected because it's part of the student speaking, not interlanguage. This is how they speak and their pronunciation and their accent. Yes, you can improve accent, and there's specific teachers for that have to do with accent training, not so much with language learning. That has to do more with accent. Okay. Then, there's another question. ¿Hay otra pregunta?
Sí, estamos viendo la pregunta de Erika.
Okay, Erika asked what we can do to help students who are afraid of making mistakes or committing errors in front of the class. This has to do with what we talked about, which is the rapport that you can create, you can generate with students. This is what you can help. This is how you can help students to feel comfortable. Remember, in the language learning process, it's important for students to always feel comfortable in the class. Some students are extremely shy. There's a couple of strategies that you can use, but it has to do with you as a teacher, your personality, how the relationship is in the group, what the group atmosphere, the classroom atmosphere is, and those are the ways that you are able to really be able to help the student to feel more comfortable. It doesn't have to do with error correction. This question doesn't have to do so much with error correction. It has to do with the classroom dynamic, has to do with your rapport with the student and with the classroom atmosphere. So to answer this, it has to do with other factors that you would need help from maybe another teacher from your school or your workplace to see if there's something that you can do to help motivate students. Or you, Erika, see how your students interact, maybe have your other students motivate this student to interact more. But this doesn't have to do so much with error correction. It has to do with other factors that are a little bit more social.
Muchas gracias, maestro. También quisiera hacer lectura de algunos comentarios que vemos en el chat, como por ejemplo en el caso Verónica, le gustó la presentación y la información comenta que va a ser de mucha ayuda, al igual que Roberto, feliz por lo que ha comentado, que es igualmente de bastante ayuda. No hay ninguna pregunta, contestan algunos otros participantes y están totalmente de acuerdo con lo que dice, les gustó la conferencia. Miriam Morales, agradecida y muy interesante la conferencia. Silvia Olivera, excelente presentación y bueno, le gustaría saber si también la presentación la podremos compartir. Les comento, tanto la cuestión de la presentación platicaremos con el maestro, pero también recordarles que esta conferencia la pueden ustedes también observar. Tenemos nuestra página de Facebook. Ustedes van a poder también ver la retransmisión y comentarles, aprovechar también en este espacio, maestro, para hacer énfasis que, bueno, como pueden ustedes observar, el maestro Roberto García Hernández forma parte de la plantilla docente, como comenté al inicio, de la maestría en TESOL. esta y también cualquier otra información que ustedes quieran enviar, que ustedes quieran comentar acerca del profesor o de la propia maestría, informarles que tenemos este correo electrónico que es informes.posgrado@urce.edu.mx. Ustedes, si tienen alguna pregunta que haya quedado todavía al aire, no duden en enviárnoslos. Cualquier duda que también tengan respecto a la maestría, nosotros le contestamos con mucho gusto a este correo. Y comentarles, maestro, aprovechando el espacio, que si bien la maestría se está ofertando en TESOL, es propiamente, se ha perfilado como una excelente alternativa para aquellos que desean adquirir pues, conocimientos en temas de evaluación, manejo de aula, creación de ambientes, conocimientos que podrán aplicar en su praxis profesional. Los maestrantes también en TESOL, desde el primer semestre, como ustedes pueden observar en el mapa curricular, cursan materias que fortalecen el quehacer y la práctica de la enseñanza y el aprendizaje. Comentarles que las clases son totalmente en inglés, tanto en el desarrollo de la escritura como en la parte oral. Repetirles, así como está el día de hoy con nosotros el maestro Roberto García Hernández, nuestra planta docentes está conformada por especialistas en la materia, con experiencia y trayectoria en la asignatura que imparten, y se integra tanto con profesores oaxaqueños como foráneos. Esto con el objetivo de ofrecer diversidad de experiencias y vivencias, y sobre todo también procurar vínculos y la creación de redes entre pares. Como ustedes pueden ver, la maestría en TESOL es una excelente opción académica para la formación de profesionistas. Esta maestría se imparte con una modalidad presencial todos los sábados de 8 a 4 de la tarde. En cuestiones de costo, manejan costos de inscripción, que son 4 de 2,000 pesos, y la totalidad de la maestría se divide en 24 pagos mensuales de 3,500. El inicio de cursos para esta segunda generación es el 4 de septiembre de este año, y todos aquellos que estén interesados y antes del 17 de julio se inscriban, van a obtener un 20% de descuento en la inscripción. Reitero también el correo en donde ustedes podrán enviar las preguntas que quedaron al aire, como ya les comenté, pero cualquier duda, cualquier información en informes.posgrado@urce.edu.mx. También van a poder ver la retransmisión de esta conferencia en Posgrado Urce, nuestra página de Instagram como Posgrado Urce, y cualquier duda también que quieran hacer, alguna pregunta, lo podemos atender con mucho gusto en los teléfonos 51 4 14 10 con extensión 144 o 145. Las sedes, la impartición de cada una de las clases es en la sede Urce Campus del Rosario. Actualmente por la contingencia, repito, los podemos atender vía telefónica o por el correo de informes.posgrado@urce.edu.mx.
Pues muchísimas gracias, maestro Roberto, por su apoyo, por su colaboración, por su disposición para compartir su experiencia y conocimientos tan oportunos y de utilidad para quienes se dedican a la docencia. No tengo duda que para muchos de nosotros este tiempo que compartimos ha sido una inversión que se reflejará en nuestra vida profesional y redundará en el aprendizaje de nuestros alumnos. Agradecemos a toda nuestra audiencia su activa participación y los invitamos a animarse a ser parte de la comunidad Posgrado Urce y vivir la experiencia de hacer la diferencia. Muy buenas noches a todos. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, maestro.